Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome back to Night Stories from VHS Era, where time stands still and the soft glow of CRT screens still flickers in the corners of our memories. I'm glad you're here with me tonight. Before we begin, let me ask you something. Do you remember the sound of quarters jingling in your pocket as you walk down the sidewalk toward the arcade? Can you still feel the weight of those coins, warm from your palm, promising just a few more minutes of pixelated glory? Have you ever wondered why that sound alone could light up your heart like nothing else? Stay with me until the end of this story, because tonight we're going back to that very moment, the walk, the doors opening, and the promise each coin held in a world glowing with neon dreams. By the end, you'll remember how it truly felt, and maybe, just maybe, you'll carry that warmth back into your dreams. It was always late afternoon when I made that walk. The sky was beginning to turn golden, and my backpack felt lighter than it did all day, not because I had taken anything out, but because of what lay ahead. I'd saved my quarters all week, stashing them in a little ceramic Garfield bank on my dresser, and each one felt like a victory. 4 for doing the dishes, 2 for helping my uncle rake leaves, 1 I found under the couch cushion. They all mattered. It wasn't just money. It was potential. The moment I stepped outside, I'd slide my hand into my pocket and give it a little shake. That clinking sound. Oh, that sound. Not loud, not sharp, just soft and rhythmic, like a wind chime for kids in sneakers. Did that sound make your heart beat faster too? Did it send that electric thrill down your spine because you knew that soon you'd be stepping into the pulsing, coin-eating cathedral of joy we called the arcade? My local spot was called Galaxy Zone. I can still see the sign in my mind. Neon pink and blue letters flickering ever so slightly as if breathing. It was wedged between a dry cleaner and a video rental store that always had faded posters of The Mask and Jurassic Park taped to the window. But Galaxy Zone, that was sacred ground. Just standing outside, hearing the muffled beats of Street Fighter II theme music leaking through the glass, I'd get chills. There was a moment, right before I pushed the door open, when time seemed to pause. I'd reach into my pocket one more time, curl my fingers around the stack of quarters, and squeeze. It was a quiet gesture, but it meant everything. It meant readiness. It meant possibility. It meant that no matter how boring school had been, or how gray the world sometimes looked, fun was real, and it was just on the other side of that door. And then, the door swung open. Do you remember that smell? The mix of warm electronics, old carpet, and popcorn dust. It sounds strange to say it now, but that smell was part of the magic. It told you that you were inside a place where reality bent and quarters ruled. The lights were always low, mostly, to make the arcade cabinets shine brighter. But also, I think, to make us feel like we were somewhere else, like we'd slipped into another realm. I'd take a few steps in, and without fail, that sound came again. The coins in my pocket, jingling with every step. But inside Galaxy Zone, that sound blended into something bigger. You remember it, right? The symphony of 8-bit melodies, digital explosions, joystick clicks, and kids yelling, "I got next." It was chaos, but the best kind. That first walk inside was sacred. I never rushed. I wanted to absorb every corner, every flash of animation, every kid cheering or groaning in triumph or defeat. I'd pass by Mortal Kombat, where older kids slammed buttons like they were fighting for their lives. I'd glance at Pac-Man, where someone's mom was quietly racking up a score so high it looked like a glitch. And in the back, always in the back, was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, its screen glowing like a campfire. But the quarters, they decided the night. I'd sit on one of those vinyl-covered stools next to the change machine and count them carefully. 12, sometimes 15. If I was lucky, maybe even 20. Did you ever do that too? Line them up on the edge of the machine like little silver soldiers, each one ready to march into a new adventure. My first quarter always went to Galaga, not because I was good at it, but because it was my ritual. Something about the rhythm of that game, the simplicity, the calm before the storm, helped me focus. And once I played that round, win or lose, I was in the zone, Galaxy Zone to be precise. One night I remember dropping a quarter by accident. It hit the floor and rolled under NBA Jam, and I spent 10 minutes trying to fish it out with a straw wrapper. A kid helped me. Danny, I think his name was. He had a Power Rangers backpack and the fastest hands I'd ever seen on Sonic the Hedgehog. We weren't friends outside the arcade, but inside for that night we were on the same team. That's the thing about arcades in the 90s. You didn't need to know someone to play together. You just needed 2 quarters and a mutual love for pixels. Do you remember that feeling? How strangers could become allies with nothing but a "you want to play" and a nod. Those were real connections. No usernames, no lobbies, just buttons and belief. At some point I'd take a break and get a soda. The machine only took dollar bills and it hated crumpled ones, so I always carried a flat one in my sock, my emergency Dr. Pepper fund. I'd sip it slowly, sitting on the edge of a carpeted step, watching other kids battle it out. Some were intense, locked in deep focus. Others were laughing, shouting, spinning around. Every kid in that room was living a mini adventure, and all of it began with that sound. That soft, unmistakable clinking of quarters in your pocket. See, the reason it felt electric and the reason it made your chest buzz was because it was a sound of freedom. We didn't have credit cards or cell phones or digital lives. We had quarters, and each one bought us time. Time to play, time to dream, time to be a little reckless in the safest place we knew. By the end of the night, my pocket would be lighter, sometimes empty, but my heart always felt full. Full of noise, color, movement, full of memory. I'd walk back home with tired legs and sticky fingers from nacho cheese chips, and I'd already be thinking about how to earn more quarters for next Friday. Do you remember how the world seemed so big, and yet the arcade felt like the entire universe? Now you do. There was always that strange pause after walking in, after the first breath of recycled air hit your chest and the soundscape wrapped itself around your ears. It wasn't hesitation exactly, but a kind of overwhelmed excitement, like standing at the gates of a theme park with only enough tickets to ride a few attractions. How do you choose where to begin when every machine flashes its colors like it's calling your name? Have you ever stood there frozen, your quarters like small weights in your pocket, while your eyes darted from one glowing cabinet to the next? That was the thing about arcades in the 90s. The games weren't just games. They were experiences, each one offering its own world, its own challenge, its own rhythm. There was no menu screen where you could just scroll and click. You had to walk past each cabinet, feel its pull, decide if it was worth one of your precious coins. And sometimes that decision felt bigger than anything school had thrown at you all week. I used to stand near the change machine for a good 5 minutes just watching. Watching kids laugh or groan, watching hands fly over buttons, watching screens explode in color. I didn't want to waste my first quarter. That first choice always set the tone. If I picked something too hard and lost in under a minute, the disappointment clung to me like static. But if I picked the right game, one I was in sync with, it felt like I had unlocked the cheat code to the night. There were always a few go-to machines depending on what mood I was in. Galaga for calm focus, Mortal Kombat when I needed to let out some steam, Turtles in Time if someone else wanted to play co-op, and then there were the wildcard cabinets, the newer ones that showed up suddenly with flashy attract screens and lines of kids trying to master the first few levels. One month it was Cruisin' USA, another month it was Time Crisis with those clunky foot pedals and bright plastic guns. Did you ever feel that twitch of curiosity like, what's that new one? Should I try it? Or should I stick with what I know? That inner debate was constant. Sometimes I'd pace the aisles once or twice, checking which machines were occupied, which ones had a kid who looked like they'd be there forever, and which ones had no one around at all. I didn't like being watched when I played. I preferred slipping into the screen, unnoticed. Just me and the joystick and the hypnotic hum of background music. There was one night I remember clearly. I had exactly 16 quarters. I told myself I'd start with something easy, something familiar. But Street Fighter II had just been updated with a new cabinet. Brighter colors, sharper sounds, even a different joystick that clicked just a bit more sharply than the old one. It called to me. But so did the Simpsons arcade game, with its ridiculous boss fights and that oddly satisfying attack where Marge whacked enemies with a vacuum cleaner. I stood in between the two machines for what must have been 3 full minutes. Watching, listening, weighing the value of 1 quarter. Have you ever felt that kind of anxiety over something so small? It wasn't about the money. It was about the moment. You only had so many chances before your pockets were empty again. And choosing wrong meant not just losing a game, but losing time. Losing the chance to escape, to win, to feel something that only a blinking, beeping machine could give you. Eventually, I walked over to Rampage. It wasn't the most popular machine, but it was one of my favorites. There was something cathartic about climbing buildings and punching them to pieces. I played as Lizzie, the green lizard, and within minutes I was smashing helicopters and chomping down on pixel people. A good start. Not great, but steady. My hands remembered the rhythm, and I didn't lose right away. That was important. You had to protect your energy, especially early in the night. After that, the pressure eased. Once the first quarter dropped and the screen lit up in response, I was no longer stuck in my head. I was playing, living. The choice had been made, and now the world narrowed to just me and the game. But still, choosing that first one, it was always a big deal. And every night, the stakes felt high. You didn't want to waste even 1 coin. Not when you'd spent all week earning them. Do you remember how proud you felt counting out those quarters? How each one had a little story. This one came from walking the neighbor's dog. That one came from folding laundry without being asked. And now you were spending them, not on candy or trading cards, but on moments, on memories. Sometimes I'd change my mind mid-walk. I'd be halfway to Donkey Kong and then pivot toward Spy Hunter. Or I'd go to the far wall where the rhythm games lived. Dance Dance Revolution was way too intense for me, but I loved watching others play it. Their feet flew like lightning, and I'd imagine myself being that brave, stepping up, letting the music take over. I never did. Not back then, but I always thought, maybe next time. One of the best parts of Galaxy Zone was that it had this mirror on the ceiling, angled down so the parents sitting in the lounge could watch the floor, but I used it differently. I'd sometimes glance up to see the whole arcade at once. It looked like a living organism. Flashing lights, kids moving between machines, soda cups on carpeted steps. That mirror made me feel like I was part of something bigger, like I was inside a dream someone had built just for us. After a few rounds, I usually found my groove. The pressure of choosing faded, and the rest of the night unfolded like a mixtape. Some hits, some experiments, and the occasional surprise. I'd discover a game I hadn't tried before and fall in love with it. Or I'd go back to an old favorite and beat a level I'd never passed. And all of it started with that first decision. That quiet moment of standing, watching, thinking. Think that's what made the arcade different from any other place. It was a temple of tiny decisions. Which game, which character, which button combo, which moment to try again or walk away. It trained us, in a way, to choose, to commit, to take a risk. And even now, all these years later, I still remember how it felt. That flicker of doubt, that surge of excitement, that silence before the noise, the fear of wasting a quarter, the joy of making the right choice, the simple magic of believing that, with just one coin, you could do something amazing, and maybe, just maybe you did. There was always something different about the Street Fighter II cabinet. You could feel it from across the arcade, the way a crowd gathered around it like moths circling a flame. No other machine had that kind of presence. The buttons were louder, the joystick wore down faster, and there was almost always someone standing in front of it with their stance wide and their fingers twitching like they were born to battle. Have you ever waited in line behind kids older than you, heart pounding, just for the chance to put your quarter on the screen and say, "I've got next"? I remember those moments like a vivid loop in my head. The arcade carpet beneath my sneakers, that sticky sweet smell of cola and nacho cheese in the air, the hum of the crowd all around me, and there I was, clutching 2 quarters in my fist, trying not to let my nerves show. Standing behind older kids, high schoolers mostly, was like standing in the shadow of arcade royalty. They moved differently. They talked in codes I didn't always understand. Chargeback, forward punch, corner trap, fireball spam. Words that seemed secret, powerful, like they belonged to some underground clan. And all I wanted was to belong too. There was a ritual to waiting in line at the Street Fighter cabinet. You didn't talk unless someone talked to you first. You didn't stand too close. And you definitely didn't interrupt a match. You just watched, observed, learned. I used to stand with my hands in my hoodie pocket, trying to look casual while mentally taking notes. Watching how someone used Guile's flash kick, how Chun-Li's lightning legs could pin someone in a corner, how Zangief's spinning pile driver could turn the tide in seconds. It was more than a game. It was a fight for respect. And I wanted so badly to earn mine. Do you remember that feeling? When the kid in front of you stepped up and you knew you were next. That split-second panic, like maybe you should back out. Maybe you weren't ready. But backing out meant losing more than your place in line. It meant losing face. So you stayed, and you watched. And when your turn came, you slid your quarter in with trembling fingers and took the joystick into your hand like it was a sword. There was this one Saturday afternoon I remember clearer than most. The place was packed. Street Fighter II Turbo was the hot new upgrade, and the cabinet had a glowing red trim that made it feel dangerous, almost forbidden. I waited behind 3 older kids, all of them with baseball caps turned backward, cargo shorts, and a confident lean that I could never quite pull off. They were loud, laughing every time someone got hit with a combo, calling out moves like sports commentators. I stood behind them, quiet, trying to look like I'd been there 100 times before, even though my stomach felt like it was flipping over. When my turn finally came, I stepped up and picked Ryu. I always picked Ryu. There was something about his focus, his simplicity. He didn't have flash like Vega or speed like Blanca, but he was solid, dependable. I liked that. The guy I was facing chose Ken, of course, and he turned to his friend with a smirk like it was already decided. That smirk stayed with me all through the match. I lost that round in less than 2 minutes. My hands were too stiff, too careful. I blocked too much and forgot to attack. He knew what he was doing. I was just trying to keep up. But in the middle of round 2, something shifted. I landed a Shoryuken, my first real hit. The screen flashed, and for just a second, the older kids behind me went quiet. That was enough. I didn't win the match, but I didn't get destroyed either. I walked away with a sliver of pride. Sometimes a sliver is enough. I'd go home afterward and practice on my old SNES. The controller was worn smooth from hours of Street Fighter II, and I'd try to remember everything I saw at the arcade. The combos, the counters, the timing. I even started to hold the controller differently, more like the kids at Galaxy Zone. My thumbs got quicker. My confidence grew. And little by little, I stopped being afraid to stand in that line. There were days when I actually won, when I beat someone older, when I stayed on the machine for more than one round. The first time that happened, my knees almost gave out. A kid I didn't know clapped me on the back and said, "Nice one, man." I smiled like it was nothing, but inside it felt like fireworks. That moment stayed with me for days. That's what those games gave us, wasn't it? Little victories that felt like epic triumphs, and yet it was never just about the winning. It was about showing up, about facing the fear, about waiting in line, quarter ready, heart racing, and stepping into the spotlight even when you weren't. Sure, you belonged. Street Fighter taught me that. That courage doesn't always mean winning. Sometimes it just means not walking away. There was a code among arcade kids, an unspoken respect. If you played hard, if you didn't complain, if you gave it your all, you earned your place, even if you lost. And I think that was the beginning of something bigger in me. The idea that effort mattered, that being brave in small ways could shape who you were in bigger ones. Years later, I saw an old Street Fighter II machine in the back of a retro game store. Dusty, faded, its screen dimmer than I remembered. I walked up and placed a quarter on the glass, just to feel it again. That click, that challenge, that pulse of fear and joy. And as I played, I remembered that line. Those kids. That day I landed my first Shoryuken, and I smiled, not because I won, but because I played. It wasn't just the games that made the arcade magical, it was the moments. Those intense, sweat-dripping, finger-cramping moments when you were face to face with a final boss. The screen would darken, the music would shift to something deeper, heavier, and you could almost feel your heart sink to the rhythm. Do you remember that? The way your hands started to tremble, not because you were afraid, but because you knew this was it. The boss fight. No continues, no mercy. Some of those machines were unforgiving. Final Fight, Golden Axe, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mortal Kombat 2, Metal Slug. They pulled no punches when it came to their bosses. They were towering, impossible, and sometimes downright unfair. But somehow that made them better. You didn't just play those games, you survived them. Or tried to. And when you made it to the final boss, it was like standing at the peak of a digital mountain, quarter by quarter, bruise by bruise, blinking in disbelief that you'd actually made it. My friends and I had our own strategy. We'd gather around a beat-em-up machine like the Simpsons arcade game, usually with a Slurpee from the corner 7-Eleven in one hand and a pocket of sticky quarters in the other. We'd slam them in, elbow to elbow, choosing our characters with the precision of warriors. I was always Bart, for no reason other than I liked the way he said cowabunga when he jumped. We'd breeze through the early levels, shouting over each other, cheering whenever we pulled off a team move or found a health item shaped like a Krusty Burger. But the boss fights, those were different. The boss fights changed the whole rhythm of the arcade. They demanded everything you had. Button mashing. It wasn't just a playstyle, it was survival. You gripped the joystick so tightly your knuckles went white, and your thumb hovered over the attack button like it was a detonator. The moment the boss appeared, you were locked in. There was no looking away. Only pressing, smashing, swiping, dodging, and hoping. Hoping you had one more life. Hoping the next move would be the final blow. I remember this one afternoon, drenched in July heat, playing X-Men with two other kids I barely knew. We had teamed up spontaneously, our quarters stacked in a line across the top of the cabinet like flags of truce. The game was heating up. We'd just defeated Pyro and made it to Magneto. The music shifted. The screen began to pulse with electricity, and he floated onto the battlefield with a voice distorted by grainy sound chips. "Welcome to die," I laughed. We all did. But that laugh faded fast. Magneto was brutal, teleporting from one end of the screen to the other, unleashing waves of energy that drained our health bars with terrifying speed. Our fingers were a blur. You couldn't just play with your hands. You had to play with your whole body. shoulders tense, eyes wide, mouth hanging open. I even started leaning into the joystick, like somehow putting my body weight into it would make my attacks stronger. Have you ever mashed buttons so hard that your palm started to sting, that your thumb felt raw from the repeated tap of plastic on skin, that you had to shake your hand out in the middle of the fight but didn't dare stop because if you did, the boss would win? That's what those fights were like. Every kid in that arcade had a story about the time they almost beat the boss, and the ones who actually did, they became legends. That day, with Magneto flinging energy like a storm, I remember catching a second wind. We were all down to our last lives, and you could feel it. The kids behind us were holding their breath. I was spamming my mutant power, even though it cost health, just to get some kind of edge. And then, out of nowhere, one of my teammates, I think his name was Marcus, nailed a final combo. The screen flashed, Magneto froze, and then exploded in a blaze of pixelated glory. We shouted. No, we screamed. Arms raised like we'd won a championship game. It wasn't just a victory, it was a war won. And the feeling afterward? Like stepping out of a roller coaster, dizzy, sweaty, spent. I looked down and my shirt was damp. My fingers were sore, my legs shaky, but I couldn't stop smiling. That was the power of a boss fight. It didn't matter that it was just sprites and pixels. It felt real, like we had gone through something together. What amazed me most about those moments was how they brought people together. Strangers became teammates, rivals became allies. You didn't have to know someone to fight beside them. All you had to do was step up, insert your quarter, and join the fray. I met some of the coolest people during those chaotic boss fights. And even if I never saw them again, I still remember their faces, their shouts, their laughter when the boss finally went down, their high fives, sweaty and loud. Back then, the calluses on your fingers were badges of honor, proof that you had fought and maybe lost, but still kept playing. That your hands remembered every frantic press of the attack button, that you gave it everything. And maybe that's what I miss the most. Not just the games, but that feeling of going all in, of fighting for something, even if it was just a digital villain on a glowing screen. Nowadays, I pick up a controller and the buttons feel lighter, more polished. But sometimes I close my eyes and I can still feel that old joystick in my hand. The rigid buttons, the faint scent of warm plastic, the heat of the arcade thick around me. And I remember the sweat on my brow, the sting in my palm, the triumph in my chest. It was all worth it, because sometimes even if you walked away sore and broke for that one glorious moment when the boss went down, you felt like a hero. Sometimes the magic didn't even require holding the joystick. Sometimes it was just standing there, watching. Those quiet moments, when the arcade was buzzing around me, but I wasn't playing anything yet, had their own kind of spell. I'd stand just a few feet away from the screen, fingers tapping the side of my leg, eyes fixed on what gamers today call the attract mode. But back then, we didn't have a name for it. It was just what the game did when no one was playing. And somehow it pulled you in as much as the gameplay itself. The attract screen was a silent promise. A promise of chaos, of adventure, of battles that hadn't happened yet. The screen would flash with vibrant colors, characters would burst into motion, explosions would ripple across the scene, and a booming narrator, often in hilariously broken English, would shout something like, "Prepare yourself for battle." And right there, before ever touching the controls, your imagination would explode. You weren't just a kid anymore. You were a warrior, a soldier, a hero in waiting. Sometimes I'd lose myself in those loops, especially with games I couldn't afford to play that day. R-Type, Altered Beast, Samurai Showdown, Splatterhouse. They were like windows into other worlds. You'd watch the attract screen on loop, absorbing the music, the moves, the glimpses of bosses and backgrounds, memorizing every frame like it was a secret message meant just for you. You could almost hear the cabinet whisper, "Come on. Just one quarter. See what happens." And waiting your turn behind someone else meant you had time to study. I used to pretend I wasn't watching, standing at a casual angle like I didn't care. But the truth? I was analyzing every move, watching how the player dodged bullets, how they used power-ups, how they failed. There was a quiet science to it. If I was going to put my only coin in that machine, I wanted to make it count. And sometimes, just watching someone else play taught you more than any manual ever could. I remember standing behind this teenager named Kyle one Saturday afternoon. He was one of those older guys who always wore a denim vest with patches on it and knew every trick in Ghosts and Goblins. The game was punishing, cruel even, but Kyle made it look effortless. I watched as he breezed past Red Reamer demons and skeleton knights with a kind of rhythm, almost like he was dancing with the game. Every time he made a risky jump or nailed a perfect attack, I let out a tiny breath. And when he lost a life, I felt it in my gut. But the attract screen in between each death always reset the mood, like a heartbeat. It reminded us what we were fighting for. Some games had attract screens that felt more like movie trailers. Shinobi had this epic music that made you want to bow before the screen. Captain Commando would show all the characters striking poses in perfect sync, with explosions popping behind them like fireworks on the 4th of July. And of course, Street Fighter II, the GOAT, had that iconic intro. A city skyline at dusk, 2 fighters in a street brawl, a punch, a flash, a KO. Then, Street Fighter II, the World Warrior. That screen didn't just advertise a game, it called out to you. Sometimes, I didn't even realize I'd been standing there for 15 minutes, watching the same 30-second loop over and over. That's the power those games had. You didn't have to be playing to be inside them. You were already halfway gone just from watching. The music, the pixel art, the exaggerated animations, they were hypnotic. They were designed to lure you, and man, they worked. Especially when your own reflection stared back at you in the glass, caught between reality and pixels. And then, the best moment of all, when the kid in front of you finally lost. They'd step away, maybe with a dramatic sigh or a shrug, and the attract screen would flash again as if to reset the challenge. That was your cue, your moment. You'd slide in, coins clinking in your pocket, palms sweating. The screen would flicker, the music would swell. Insert coin. And just like that, you were no longer watching. You were inside. It's wild how powerful that memory still feels. The idea that something as simple as a demo screen could create such a deep emotional charge. But those screens weren't just demos. They were dreams, invitations, promises. They told you, in bright burning pixels, this is where it starts. Your story begins now. And I believed it every single time. I don't think I'll ever forget that sinking feeling. The cold emptiness when I reached into my pocket and heard nothing but silence. No clinking, no jingle, just the soft brush of fabric between my fingers, like the sound of a closing curtain. It always came too soon, didn't it? One moment you were rich, a king with a pocket full of potential, and the next, you were broke, staring at the glowing screen of your favorite game with a helpless, aching heart. Have you ever felt that sting, that realization that the fun was over before it should have been? It was always the same. I'd tell myself I'd pace it out, spend wisely, pick my games carefully. But the thrill of the arcade had a way of sweeping those plans aside. Just one more try, just one more boss, just one more shot at beating that older kid who'd knocked me out in Mortal Kombat 2. And before I knew it, I was fishing the bottom of my pocket for a coin that wasn't there. Nothing. Only lint and hope. I'd step back from the machine slowly, like walking away from something sacred. The attract screen would flash behind me, mocking me with its endless energy. Insert coin. If only I could. I'd glance around, trying not to look too desperate, but in truth, I was scanning the crowd. Where were my friends? Who still had quarters? Who looked generous? Or maybe just distracted enough not to notice me lingering with purpose near their game. There was always that one friend. For me, it was Marcus. He wore a Chicago Bulls cap everywhere, tilted just slightly to the side, and he always seemed to have just a few more quarters than the rest of us. His mom gave him extra change for lunch, and somehow he'd turn it into an empire of game time. He wasn't stingy exactly, but he wasn't a bank either. You had to time it just right. Catch him after a win, when the adrenaline was still pumping and generosity came easy. I remember tapping his shoulder once as he stood victorious in front of Final Fight. He had just cleared a level and his face was glowing with pride. "Hey," I said casually, pretending I wasn't desperate. "You got a spare quarter?" He didn't even look away from the screen, just reached into his pocket and held one out without a word. I could have hugged him right there. That small metal disc might as well have been a key to another world. But not every day had a Marcus. Some days you had to walk the floor, hoping to find one of your other friends with mercy in their heart. Or worse, resort to watching from the sidelines, pretending you were still part of it all. Have you ever done that? Hung around someone else's game, cheering them on just loud enough to remind them you were still there? Maybe they'd offer you a turn out of kindness. Maybe they'd slide the machine over to two-player mode and hand you a lifeline. It didn't always work, but sometimes it did. And when it did, it felt like the universe had tossed you a second chance. There was a kind of quiet shame in asking for coins, especially in front of the older kids. They'd look at you with smirks, sometimes offering snide comments like, "Should have saved your change, rookie." I'd pretend I didn't care, laugh it off. But inside, it stung. You didn't want to be the kid begging. You wanted to be the one playing, the one who walked from machine to machine with confidence, not hesitation. I remember once standing near the Simpsons arcade cabinet, watching a group of teenagers blow through level after level. My last coin had vanished in a heartbreaking loss to Krusty's evil clones, and I was just standing there, quiet, trying not to look as empty as I felt. One of the guys noticed me, nudged his friend, and without saying a word, slid over to the side. "Want to play?" he asked. He didn't say it in a mocking way, just genuine, like he remembered what it felt like to be the kid left out. I nodded, heart pounding, and just like that, I was back in the fight, swinging Bart's skateboard like it was Excalibur. Those little gestures, those tiny acts of kindness in the glow of arcade lights, they meant everything. And on the flip side, there were moments where I learned to give too. When I had quarters and saw someone else circling the room, looking the same way I used to, I'd nudge them, offer a coin without much fanfare. "Here, take it." Not because I wanted something in return, but because I knew how it felt. We were all just kids chasing the same magic, hoping to stretch our time in that neon cathedral just a little longer. Sometimes I think those empty pocket moments taught me more than the games themselves. They taught me humility. They taught me timing. They taught me that the joy of playing wasn't always about the win. It was about the connection. The way a simple coin, a single quarter, could bridge the gap between loneliness and belonging. Funny how something so small could hold so much weight. There was an unspoken law in the arcade, as sacred as any code of honor. It didn't need posters or signs. No one taught it formally. You just learned it, saw it in action, picked it up like a reflex. You walked up to a machine with a crowd around it, and you didn't ask, you didn't argue. You simply reached into your pocket, pulled out a quarter, and placed it gently, firmly, on the panel below the screen. That was your claim, your name in line, your "I got next," and everyone understood it. It was almost ceremonial. The clink of the coin on the plastic or metal surface was more than just a sound. It was a statement. You were stepping into the ring soon. You had the courage, the skill, or at least the hope to face whatever challenger came next. No one questioned it. No one skipped it. If they did, the entire rhythm of the arcade would break down. That little coin held a universe of respect. Some games had 2 or 3 quarters lined up at once, like a trail of anticipation. You'd watch each match, eyes bouncing from the screen to the coins, counting silently. 2 more games, then 1. Then it was your turn. The tension would build. With each passing round, your fingers twitching like they already held the joystick. Sometimes the guy playing would glance at the row of coins and shake his head with a smirk. "Looks like I've got challengers." and the crowd would tighten, because that wasn't just a game happening. That was a battle for pride. I remember standing in line for Street Fighter II, watching the reigning champ dominate round after round. He had a habit of turning his cap backward every time he picked Ryu, and you knew then that things were about to get serious. I'd stand there nervous, but ready, my quarter resting patiently among others. I wasn't just another kid waiting to play. I was a potential spoiler, the underdog that could end the streak. Maybe, if I got lucky. Sometimes people tried to pretend they didn't see the quarters. New kids, outsiders. They'd walk up, joystick already in hand, acting like the space was theirs. But then came the voice, calm but firm, from someone in the crowd. "Hey, there's a line." And they'd pause, glance down at the line of coins, and step back. Because you didn't mess with that system. It was older than all of us, and breaking it was a fast track to dirty looks and cold shoulders. There was something almost beautiful in how the rule held, no matter where you were. Whether it was a big downtown arcade with polished machines or a grimy corner store with flickering lights, the ritual was the same. A quarter down meant a spot saved. No arguments, no shouting matches, just trust. It was one of the few times in life where respect came not from words, but from that small, shining marker resting silently by the controls. I had my own ritual with my quarter. I'd place it heads up like it gave me luck. If I was really nervous, I'd whisper something to myself. Nothing fancy, just a little, "Let's go." I knew that quarter wasn't magic, but it felt like a charm, something that connected me to all the others who'd stood there before me, palms sweaty, heart pounding, waiting for their shot. There were days I didn't even end up playing. The line would be too long. My time would run out. Or maybe I'd lend my coin to a friend who looked more anxious than I did. And that was okay too, because being part of that moment, watching the matches, feeling the energy, placing a coin just to say I'm here, was enough. Sometimes the waiting was just as exciting as the game itself. And when it was finally my turn, when the last match ended and someone waved me forward with a grin, I'd slide my coin into the slot, grip the controls, and take a deep breath. That sound, the mechanical click of the quarter being accepted, was a small victory before the real challenge began. You didn't need to say anything. Your quarter had already spoken for you. There was a smell that lived in every arcade, one you didn't notice right away, but that wrapped around you the longer you stayed. It wasn't perfume or cologne, not something anyone would bottle or sell. It was a blend, a strange symphony of simple things that, when combined, created the very scent of a childhood memory. Popcorn, with its buttery richness hanging in the air like the opening of a movie night. Pizza, warm and cheesy, served on paper plates that bent in your hands. And then, always, the musty, worn-in smell of old carpets, flattened by 1,000 sneakers, stained by years of soda spills and memories. Do you remember how comforting that mix was? How somehow, instead of being unpleasant or overwhelming, it felt like safety, like Saturday afternoon freedom. It wasn't just about the games, I realize now. It was about being surrounded by the smells of things we loved. You could follow that scent like a trail, leading you back to that sacred space filled with flashing screens, laughter, and quarters clinking inside pockets. The popcorn was always the first thing I'd notice when I stepped inside. Even before I made it past the double doors, it was there. Salty, a little sweet depending on who was working the counter. There was a small snack station just near the change machine, manned by someone who always seemed a little too bored to be there. Bags of popcorn lined the shelves behind them, glowing under the orange light of a heat lamp that buzzed quietly in the background. I'd often trade one of my precious quarters for a bag, especially if I needed time to plan which game to hit next, and the pizza. Greasy, floppy slices of pure happiness. Nothing gourmet, of course, just basic cheese or pepperoni, sometimes both if the place had gotten lucky that day. The kind of pizza that left oil marks on the napkin and stuck to the roof of your mouth if you didn't wait long enough for it to cool. But to us, it was perfect. We'd sit at those tiny plastic tables with our slices balanced on one knee, our eyes never leaving the nearest machine. Every bite tasted like celebration, Whether we'd won a match, pulled off a combo, or just survived another boss fight, pizza made it feel like we were kings. And then there was that ever-present scent of the carpet. Faint, but always there. Like dust and time, holding all the years that came before. The carpet was always a little sticky in places. Its patterns faded from foot traffic and soda. Some arcades had wild swirls and neon shapes, the kind you'd only find in the 90s. Others had dull gray or brown designs that looked older than the oldest machine. But no matter what they looked like, the carpets shared the same smell, like the air itself was woven into the fabric. And strangely, that old carpet scent was comforting, like an old blanket pulled from a closet, familiar, worn, and filled with stories. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still smell it all. The popcorn, the pizza, the dusty air that seemed to hum with electricity. And just like that, I'm back there, leaning on the side of a mortal combat machine, wiping pizza grease from my fingers, waiting for my turn while my quarter sat proudly on the panel. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't clean, but it was home in its own way. A sanctuary built not of silence and serenity, but of sound and smell and sticky fingers. And if I had the chance to breathe that air again, even just once, I'd do it without hesitation. Strange, isn't it? How a smell can bring it all rushing back. That place, that time. The laughter of your friends, the buzz of the screens, the warmth of the pizza in your hands. It's all still there, hidden deep in memory, waiting quietly behind. The scent of popcorn and carpet. There was no ceremony, no grand applause, no trophy to raise in the air. And yet, for a kid in the arcade, there was hardly a feeling more victorious than earning a spot on the high score list. Just 3 blinking letters, glowing on the screen, floating above the digital graveyard of defeated enemies or shattered records. But to us, it was a crown, a banner, a moment where, for just a little while, we were legends. Did you ever get your initials up there? Do you remember the trembling joy in your fingers when the game finally let you type them in? It usually started as an accident. You'd walk up to a machine expecting the usual outcome, maybe surviving a few stages, maybe beating 1 or 2 regular players if you were lucky. But then something would shift. A rhythm, a flow. Suddenly you weren't just playing the game, you were inside it. Your movements felt lighter, your timing sharper. Combos came effortlessly, enemies fell faster than ever before, and your score kept rising. Every ping, every digital point was like music. Even the flashing red danger lights in the corner of the screen couldn't throw you off once you were in that state. Sometimes a small crowd would gather. 1 or 2 kids at first, then maybe more. They'd hover quietly behind you, watching as your score pushed further and further toward the top of the leaderboard. You could feel their eyes. You could feel your own heart pounding like the speakers behind the machine. And still somehow, your hands didn't fail you. Button after button, move after move, you kept going, until finally, there it was, the final screen, the end of your run. And then, that sound, that beautiful sudden blip that said, enter your initials. 3 letters. That was all the game allowed. Just 3. And in that moment, those 3 letters felt like the most important thing in the world. Some of us used our real initials, proud and personal. Others used nicknames or something funny just to see it displayed above everyone else. For a while, I went with DJK, short for my name, but also because it sounded like something cooler than I really was. I remember how I used to stare at those blinking letters, backlit by a game over screen, thinking maybe I'd stop by next weekend just to see if they were still there, if someone better had come along and bumped me off, or if I had earned another round of silent respect. Did anyone ever tell you that those initials could make you feel invincible? That you could walk away from that machine a little taller, like you'd left a piece of yourself behind for the world to see? No trophies, no medals, just digital ink stamped into pixels. But it meant something. Sometimes, if we were lucky, the arcade left the high scores saved even after a reboot. Other times, we had to earn them back all over again. I can't tell you how many times I returned just to see if DJK was still blinking near the top. And when it wasn't, it became a mission. A goal. I'd feed the machine quarters like a gambler at a slot machine, determined to reclaim my spot. Of course, not every run ended in glory. There were days I'd walk out empty-handed, no initials, no bragging rights, just sweaty palms and empty pockets. But those rare moments when everything aligned, when the game and I were in perfect sync, those were the ones I carried with me. And you know what's funny? It wasn't really about impressing others. Sure, the looks from the kids around you helped, but deep down, it was more personal than that. It was about knowing you did it, that for one blazing moment, you were better than the machine, that you left a mark, however temporary, on a world that usually moved too fast to notice. Today, the machines are gone. The carpet's been replaced, the screen's silent, but in my mind, I still see those three letters glowing proudly against the darkness. DJK, a small, silly trophy, and yet, even now, it still means something. There's a unique kind of satisfaction in leaving the arcade with empty pockets, but a heart full of joy. I remember those evenings so clearly, when the last quarter slipped from my fingers into the coin slot, and the games around me faded into the background like a gentle hum. It wasn't the money that mattered, far from it. What stayed with me was the pure delight, that glowing warmth inside, a memory to carry through the week ahead. Have you ever experienced that feeling? The bittersweet moment when the fun has to pause, but your soul is somehow fuller than when you arrived? As I walked out through those sliding glass doors, the fluorescent lights of the arcade dimmed behind me, but the buzz in my head was still alive. The distant clink of quarters no longer jingling in my pocket was a quiet reminder that this visit had come to an end. But somehow, my smile stretched wider than ever, as if I'd just been handed a secret treasure only I could understand. That clattering sound of coins earlier, the weight of possibility it held, was replaced by the lighter step of someone who'd tasted a small victory in a world that was usually chaotic and unpredictable. The sky outside was often painted in soft pastel shades of sunset or cloaked in the gentle quiet of early night. Sometimes a cool breeze brushed past me, carrying faint scents from the nearby pizza parlor or the sweet smell of candy from the corner store. And as I walked home, the streets felt somehow bigger, more magical. The memories of those flashing screens, the cheers and groans of fellow players, the hypnotic glow of the arcade machines, they lingered like an invisible soundtrack to my steps. You might wonder, did I ever feel disappointed leaving with no quarters left? The truth is, yes, sometimes I did. There were moments when I wished for just one more game, one more chance to beat the high score or to outlast the boss fight. But even those fleeting pangs of longing were part of the ritual. They wove into the fabric of anticipation, making the promise of next weekend even sweeter. I'd clutch my empty pockets, not as a symbol of loss, but as proof of the hours well spent, and whisper to myself that soon enough I'd return, and return I did. Every week, the same routine unfolded. The clinking quarters, the nervous excitement of choosing the first game, the thrilling challenge of facing older kids, the button-mashing battles, the mesmerizing attract screens, and the sacred respect of saving a spot on a crowded machine. Each visit was a small chapter in a story that I was writing with every coin, every cheer, every small victory, and every friendship formed or tested. The arcade wasn't just a place, it was a world of its own, a sanctuary where childhood and imagination danced freely beneath neon lights. What was it that made those nights so unforgettable? Was it the games themselves, or maybe the people? Or perhaps the simple joy of being allowed to escape, if only for a few hours, into a place where worries faded, and the only thing that mattered was the next quarter, the next play, the next chance. Looking back now, I realize it was all of those things and something more. It was a feeling, an experience, a fleeting slice of time that seems impossible to capture again, but stays with you forever. The clinking quarters, the glow of the machines, the camaraderie, and the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent. And even though the arcades have mostly vanished, those memories remain alive, warm and comforting, whispering softly, reminding us how simple moments of joy can leave the biggest marks on our hearts. So, if you ever find yourself holding a handful of quarters, or if you hear that distant jingle echoing in your mind, remember the thrill. the anticipation, and the smile that followed every single visit. Because sometimes the greatest treasures aren't the coins we spend, but the memories we carry home.